Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Nick, your host of On the Scene with Martini. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget, you are the scene.
Hi guys, what's up? It's Nick, Honesty with Martini. Today I got Norman from Thursday and Texas and a Reason, also the creator of Antimatter. How you doing, Norman?
I'm well. It's a good morning.
Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I just want to say, like, before we get started, I one of the things that reading about our music scene and reflecting back at Antimatter, going back to your Instagram page, really got me more interested in documentation and stuff. So I just want to say thank you and stuff for that.
I mean,
But
that makes me feel really good, honestly, because I feel like people sometimes expect other people to do this kind of work, but we all sort of have our own unique experience. And if you don't document it, you lose it. So that's
Traditional,
amazing.
traditionally, I always start with talking about music, but would you mind if we started with talking about antimatter a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
So for antimatter, I know it started in 1993. It was more of like a zine, and then more recently, like a few years ago, you kind of went digital and stuff. What was kind of like you're playing in bands? I think at that time you were still in Shelter, right? At night.
Yeah.
What was what was the idea behind antimatter?
Um, I think that the genesis of it, it's funny, like I still believe that that both eras of antimatter started in very much the same way, which was that I felt a sea change in the community and I didn't feel like there was somebody who was connecting the dots. And so in 1993, the sea change was musical, it was ideological, it was aesthetic, there were a lot of things that were changing. And everything that we accepted under the umbrella of hardcore became somewhat non-cohesive. Like I always talk about a band like Split Lip playing with a band like 108. It was like, in what universe do those two bands belong on the same bill? And yet we understood it intuitively that there was a connective tissue between the two bands that was stronger than just a musical style. And that type of drawing the lines, I think, is what Antimatter did in the 90s. And I think what I attempted to do more present day. Uh, and not just between musical styles, but also musical eras. And I think like in Antimatter in 1993, for example, there weren't a ton of people doing fanzines or other documentary work in 1993 who were around long enough to connect the dots between stuff that happened in the 80s to what was happening in 93. There weren't enough people who stuck around because there was definitely in New York City anyway, a huge personnel change, let's say in 1990, right? It literally felt like the ball dropped in Times Square and half the hardcore scene disappeared. It was like Left Behind or something, the Rapture. And everybody who was left was just like, okay, what is this thing that we've inherited?
Hmm.
And how do we make it our own? So antimatter very much was born out of that. It was also trying to say, it was trying to say that you could have a fanzine where an interview with Cause for Alarm sits next to an interview with Shudder to Think, and that makes complete sense. So that's probably at the heart of the work for me is connecting things and not dividing them.
Was it always a solo project for you, or did you have at that point other people on board helping out with interviews and stuff?
No, interviews was always me. I mean, the writing was always me. That was it. I had in the early days, there was a guy named Luke Hoverman who sang for this band Another Wall. Um, and he helped me out with sort of like bringing the design part to life because in 1993 I didn't have a computer. Most
Hmm.
people didn't. And so we would actually go to his father's. I don't even know what kind of business his father owned, but his father owned some business in Connecticut. And we would take the Metro North train to Connecticut on Friday at like 6 p.m. And his father's office would clear out, and we would literally move in for the weekend. And we would stay there from Friday to 6 p.m. to Monday morning, literally just 3 days, laying the entire fanzine out by hand. Uh, because it wasn't even like we were laying the fanzine out with like, you know, we were using Quark Express at the time, but we were still cutting and pasting essentially. We were still delivering cut and paste computer printouts to to a printer, an offset printer. So he would help out with that because he understood that language better than I did. But I knew what the aesthetic vision was. I knew what I wanted it to look like. And he was probably the only other person, I mean, other than the photographers, who I always think are the sort of unheralded gifts of antimatter. I really was, even back in the 90s, I paid photographers. It was very important to me to say that this work is real, it's valued, and you deserve something.
Hmm.
It was nominal, I wasn't making tons of money, but but it was a principle.
Did you continue like doing antimatter like when you were on tour and stuff, or did you find that as like one of the struggles of going on tour was like kind of leaving your baby at home?
Well, so in the 90s, I was completely committed to antimatter. Um, I didn't I didn't have a touring band for most of it.
Okay.
So, but in the recent era, um, that was very difficult because the real sort of like first year of antimatter, I was probably on tour with Thursday at least 7 months of that year. So it was like that hurt.
Yeah.
That hurt because touring hurts enough as it is. But then, I'm like, renting hotel rooms to try to do interviews and like, you know, waking up at like 6 a.m. and going into the back area of the bus to try to like transcribe and like, do things in peace or try to write in peace. And it never really felt like I had time for myself. So that was sort of uh, a harder problem to solve.
What was an interview that you did in like I'm gonna say like first wave and second wave antimatter that you did in like the first wave of antimatter that like was like you're not I don't want to say like starstruck, but you were like, wow, I really got this person, like kind of like a bucket list guest. And then more current time, was there someone also that kind of like spoken out to you that you were like, wow, this is awesome?
Wow. I mean, that's sort of a good question. I don't know if wave one, because wave one was a lot of people that I already knew
Hmm.
in some way. So even like Zach De La Rocha, he was somebody that I already knew. It wasn't like he was a get for me. Like I was
I
just like,
gotcha. Yeah.
oh, he's coming on tour. You want to hang out?
Yeah.
And that was that. Um, it was interesting, I think, on the second wave because now, more so than in the 90s, hardcore is at a scale where sometimes there are keepers. And keepers are, they make things difficult, right? So like for example, like I'm not friends with Brendan from Turnstile personally, but his manager arranged for us to do that interview and obviously like we're from the same place. It was a great interview. It was like but I could tell that he doesn't do every interview. He doesn't.
Mm,
He's just like he doesn't want to do every interview, and I don't blame him.
yeah.
And so that felt special for him to do that at the time because at the time he had basically said no, total blackout. But I'd say that the one that I'm still the most happy about, because it was something that was like almost a prophetic kind of thing, which was Pete Wentz. Because when Pitchfork ran their article about antimatter and they asked me who was the one person that I really wanted to get on, it was Pete. I'd met Pete once in like 1997 or 1998. So we didn't have a rapport, but we had a lot of mutual friends over the years, and I knew he stayed in touch with all of them. And I just realized that he had never, as far as I could remember, and I clarified this with him in the interview, he had never done an interview with a hardcore fanzine ever.
Hmm.
Like not even when he was like a full-blown hardcore kid. Because he was like, he said back then, uh, he was like, I either wasn't the singer and no one wanted to talk to me, or I was the singer and I just had nothing to say.
Yeah,
So he was like, this is, I think, the first time I've ever been interviewed in a hardcore fanzine. And that felt nice and sort of like momentous and kind of like a get.
I gotcha. When you wanted, what was kind of like the factor that was like, okay, I want to bring antimatter back?
Whew. Um, I think I do everything if I feel like there's a void.
Hmm.
And so that even boils down to the types of songs that I write. Like if there's a thing that I feel like needs to be heard that no one's doing, or that like I feel like is intrinsically in my voice, I want to write that song, right? Um, I think like with Antimatter, there was a situation where very much like in the 90s, I felt like there was a new wave of bands that were coming in who seemed to me, I didn't know them personally this time around, but who seemed to me a lot like the bands in the 90s, who had things to say, who had important life experiences, who had insights that could help, the community, and no outlet for them to give that. Because I think the majority of people who interview hardcore bands, both in the 90s and today, don't really ask people about their lives in a way that makes people want to engage.
Hmm.
And I don't know, like, I'm not saying that I'm like special, but for whatever reason, both, in interview and off interview, people have a tendency to want to tell me about their lives. And
Yeah.
I think that that's partially because I love to tell people about my experiences and my stories. And that's a spirit of sharing. It's not a spirit of transactionality. And I think that's maybe the thing. Most interviews are transactional. You ask a question, I answer it. I'm sort of like the focus. But in antimatter interviews, I feel like there's an equity. I share as many stories as they do.
Hmm.
And, to some people, they might be like, why doesn't that guy just shut up about his life? No,
Yeah.
because this conversation is part of the story now. This conversation is part of the story, and I am now in it. So I'm going to do that. And also sharing these stories with other people. Again, it's just something where they feel then safe to say the things that they want to say. And people have said things where they've finished saying these things and then they've said, "Oh, actually don't publish that." And for the most part, I don't. But like, for example, uh, Scowl, Cat from Scowl, told me this story about being a preteen and going to Hot Topic and sort of like, it was like sort of like a real formative story to me that I thought was really special because, I'm 52 and she's, in her 20s. So it was like, I get it. Like, this is of the age and this is like a real sort of like formative moment for you. But after the interview, she was sort of like, actually, don't put that in there. And I pushed back and I was like, can I just like show you the transcription and just let you see what you said exactly and not what you think you said? And I sent it to her and she was just like, wow, that's amazing. She's like, yeah, absolutely, leave that in.
Yeah.
So I think like, that sort of openness is sort of intrinsic to what I do. And that's what I think people respond to and why I think that there's always this void for it.
I also feel like you having being in the scene and living the scene too, especially with like the younger bands, will definitely give you the opportunity for them to open up too, because like they could tell a story and like it could be like weird to them, or they're like, wow, this only happens to me, and you're like, well, no, it happened to me too, like when I was starting out or doing this and touring and stuff.
Right. And I think like actually, that's a thing where like, Brendan from Turnstile and I really sort of bonded on a lot of these things about specifically and at that point, I think Turnstile now have like blasted past this point. But like at the point that we did the interview, one of the things that he said that really made me feel or that really sort of sparked my interest was he said, I think people think that we are a lot bigger than we actually are. And, and so that makes me uncomfortable, right? And I remembered how I didn't publish this, but I'm pretty sure I told him this story of uh, when in 1996 or something, I was on tour with Texas and I was in San Francisco and I went over to Berkeley to go record shopping and I'm walking down Telegraph Avenue and this guy stops me and he's like, "Hey, aren't you Norm from Texas Reason?" And I was like, "Yeah, what's up?" And we'd start talking and one of the things he said was, "Man, it must be so crazy for you now. Like, I mean, people must stop you all the time." And I was just like, No." Like, I think he thought that we were at some sort of stage where people were like following us, like paparazzi or something. Like, it
Hmm.
was so, what a weird thing. But it was the first time that I understood deeply how other people's perceptions are so wrong, and also how they can create a weird schism in you once you understand them. And so it made me way more conscious about how I'm perceived and that's been for better and for worse over the years.
I gotcha. That's an interesting way because I feel like Brendan and Turnstile in general, they're very humble individuals, and they're such on like a global scale now. Like it's cool to see a small hardcore band from Baltimore, you know, headlining like I think they're headlining like Primavera now, or like just like crazy festivals and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, but they've figured out the special sauce,
Hmm.
meaning like what is that thing about them that makes you feel like you can't take your eyes off them? And that's like a really, that's something that I think a lot of bands maybe don't even think about. But I don't think that comes from nowhere.
Yeah,
You have to understand what makes you special, what makes you you, and then you have to lean the fuck into it. And that's really like the way I perform. And, whether or not that brings me to, main stage Primavera, doubtful, but but when you have that right chemistry like they do, it's otherworldly.
getting into like your music scene, what was kind of like some artists growing up before even the hardcore emo scene that got you into music?
I was always um extremely open and diverse about the music that I consumed, and music was more or less like an obsession for me for as long as I've been alive. So when I was literally like my earliest memories were watching the Partridge Family I had Partridge Family records, listening to the Partridge Family and being like, especially because when you see that, I don't know if you've ever watched the show, but like, the drummer is a child. And
Hmm.
like I mean, they're all children to some extent, but the drummer's a child. So as a young child, I'm like, I want to be that. And drums were, in fact, my first instrument, partially because of the Partridge Family. Like I was like, that's amazing. That's what I want to do. Um, I discovered, you know, I was born in 1974. So like my early cognizance of radio was in the late 70s and early 80s. And it was, a transistor radio that I used to carry with me everywhere. And when I discovered Casey Kasem's American Top 40 on Sunday mornings, that arguably is how I learned how to write, like literally write, in the sense that every Sunday morning I would take out one of those like little cow looking notebooks, composition books, and I would sit there with Casey Kasem and I would write the charts down. It was like my own Billboard magazine, which I didn't know existed. But I would create it because I wanted to keep track of the top 40. So I would sit there and listening to the top 40 every week for so many years, writing it down obsessively, tracking the chart movements, doing all of this. It really gives you an insight into the type of brain that I have. I'm obsessive.
Hmm.
And when I find a thing, I latch onto it and I want to know everything about it. Music in the 80s specifically, I would say, was really interesting because in a single top 40 chart, you could have everything from uh, Tanya Tucker to Crystal Gale to Marvin Gaye to the Human League to, you know what I mean? Like it was what the fuck? Like it was
Hmm.
so disjointed. And if that top 40 was a radio station today, no one would listen to it because everyone would be like, this is fucked up. Like I don't want your Frankie Goes to Hollywood in my Def Leppard, like, or whatever it is. Um, but for me, that created this open palette. And so I think I've been pretty faithful to that all my life. Like to this day, if you look at the playlists that I keep, I have these like thousands of songs long playlists in every genre of everything that I love. And it's pop, it's soul, it's funk and disco, it's house and techno and breaks and UK garage and it's metal and I still obsessively listen to everything and I feel like that's the only through line I think through my life. So if I treat hardcore obsessively, that's why.
I
It's just
gotcha.
one of a long list of things that I treat obsessively.
Was there a hardcore band or punk band that like was the first time? Because obviously, I would say for the most part, those kind of bands aren't getting on Billboard like at
Right.
that time. Was there like a band like, and how did you discover that band that got you into the scene?
Uh, I'd probably say that there were two sort of bands that I think were the ones that struck a chord for some reason or another. And I wound up having a weird, maybe not personal connection, but sort of personal connection to both of them. So those two bands were Kraut and the Crumbsuckers, both New York bands. Um, Kraut was more interesting because the first time I'd heard of Kraut was because my fourth grade teacher, who I was obsessed with, her name was Miss Cons. And I was obsessed with this teacher. Like she was my favorite person in the whole wide world. She made me feel so special. And uh I literally would give her a kiss on the cheek every day at 2 o'clock or whenever we were leaving. I'd be like, bye, Miss Cons, and I would kiss her on the cheek. It was like I was that obsessed with her. And so one day, she saw me drawing because I used to draw like band logos on my notebooks and stuff, even in fourth grade. That's how music obsessed I was. And so she asked me if I was, interested in playing music. And I was like, I want to play music so bad. And she's like, what do you want to play? And I was like, drums. And she's like, my brother is a drummer. And I was like, that's amazing. And one day she brought in a tape with a few songs of her drummer's band. I didn't like it. Fast forward to seventh grade. Around seventh grade, my older brother meets some punks, and I'm obsessive. And these guys have tapes in their car, like a box of tapes. And I ask one of them, can I listen to some of the tapes in your car? He's like, yeah, sure. So I grab the tapes, I go into my room and I listen to them. And this is the first time I'm really hearing a lot of stuff. Like I remember Stiff Little Fingers was on the tapes, Misfits were on the tapes, Black Flag, um, Blitz, like stuff that like Discharge. There was a lot of good stuff on it. And there was Kraut. And I was like, why do I know this? And this time I'm listening to Kraut and it's resonating. I'm like, this is fucking awesome. And I'm becoming like this big Kraut head. And then it it dawns on me that this was the band that my fourth grade teacher's brother was in. And I look it up and his name is Johnny Feedback Cons. And I'm like, oh my God, holy shit, this is amazing. So Kraut became sort of like this point of pride to me. The Crumbsuckers were the first show I ever went to. So that was like a different thing because I had listened to the Life of Dreams record, which had just come out at that point, and I was really, really, really into it. And this was another situation where I'm sitting in school, seventh grade, and I'm drawing a Crumbsuckers logo on a notebook. There's a theme.
Okay.
And this kid sort of walks past my desk and's like, "You like the Crumbsuckers?" And I was like, Yeah, you know who the Crumbsuckers are?" And he was like, "Yeah, my cousin's the guitar player." He's like, "They're playing. You want to meet him?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so I went to the show. They actually signed my t-shirt. And I remember like that whole year just wearing this signed Crumbsuckers t-shirt. Like I thought I was the shit.
Yeah.
But those two bands really like musically, everything about them were really like the first things that made me feel connected.
Did you feel like there was a barrier in terms of getting connected further into the music scene at that point, only because being in seventh grade in New York City, listening to that kind of music, not, it wasn't always on all ages show, or like,
Right.
did you feel like that was an issue for you, or like did that ever kind of give you a little pushback into being involved in the scene or loving the scene?
Um, yes and no. It wasn't like an overnight thing for me. So like, that first show, if I remember correctly, that first show I think was in December of 1986. And I don't think I went to another show for probably 7 or 8 months. And I think the next time I went was at CB's. And CB's was like this weird place for me for a number of reasons. Because one, and I'm not the only person to experience this, when you walked out of the 6 train and you're walking east on Bleecker towards Bowery, and CB's sort of comes because CB's was on the corner of Bowery and Bleecker, and you could see it coming into view as you walked east on Bleecker. And as you see it coming into view, and as you start seeing the skinheads, and as you start seeing like, the punks and like all the other random people, there's this feeling of fear. And I don't know if that was just being 13 and 14 years old or that just being the reality of like, I don't know what I'm walking into. People are constantly getting chased into the street and having their boots stolen. Like it's anyone's guess what's going to
Hmm.
happen. So that level of insecurity could have been a deterrent, more so than my age, because there were other people that at least looked as old as I did hanging out. Um, what I do think was interesting and actually sort of worked out in the long run is that whether or not I got into CBs depended on the day. Because the same people, generally speaking, did the door at CB's every week. But some weeks they'd be like, no, you're too young, get away. And some weeks they were like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
And that was fine with me because it still cost money to get into CBs, and I was still a kid who didn't have a lot of money. So just hanging out outside was as much a part of it made me feel as much a part of the community as going inside. The music, and maybe that has informed the way I think about hardcore in a lot of ways, because what I considered going to the show was just going to see people, hanging out, talking. Like there were a lot of times that people would set up things outside of CBs, like where you could buy pins or patches, or you could buy fanzines or whatever. So it was like there was still stuff where I felt like I was a part of the community, even when I couldn't get in. And I think that that was like that was very instructive for me because it made me realize that hardcore was about people and not necessarily the music. God bless the music. We loved the music, but we also came for each other.
Did you ever have a story or like an experience like at CB's or another venue at that time, like an oh shit story, like this happened to you, or like you getting chased out by someone or getting into it with someone?
I mean, there was a period of time where I definitely hung out with some people that were on the violent side.
Questionable.
Yeah, definitely. You have no idea. But I think like I, to a certain extent, there was a period of time, I think, in those early years where I got into being a skinhead. And if you were a skinhead in 1988, 1989, you know, violence was something that sort of just happened. Um, I was never a particularly violent person. I grew up in the city. I definitely, had to fight when I was a kid. Um, but it wasn't something I enjoyed. It wasn't something I instigated. And if anything, when fights did happen at shows, I was always like bummed.
Yeah.
Like I was just like, why? Like, why here? Go fight somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, so I never really wanted to be that person. And, I've seen awful fights happen. But I don't know that I've ever been in a situation where I was just like, where I really felt like, oh shit. Like the only time I think I remember feeling like, oh shit, like this is weird was actually not even in the city. It was at a club on Long Island called Sundance. And I don't even remember who was playing because this was happening between bands. And what happened was I remember they were playing Slayer between bands. And this guy is like moshing by himself, like just sort of running into people and like, it was between bands. Everybody's
Yeah.
like, what the hell is this guy doing? And I'm standing there and I see him look at me and just come running straight for me. And he just tackles me. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I get up and I'm thinking, like, is this guy trying to fight me? And then all of a sudden, I see these kids that I barely knew, but kids that I recognized from CB's who were from Brooklyn, just out of nowhere start beating the shit out of this guy for tackling me. And I'm just like, literally just walk away. I'm like, okay. And then afterwards, I see those guys and they're like, yo, we got you. We got you. Fuck that guy. And I was like, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
I didn't ask for that, but thanks, like, and at the same time, as horrible and as, as bad as I felt, there was also something about that made me feel like, yeah, you got my back.
Mm.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
Because there was a sense that this guy was an outsider, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it was like, I don't know, for whatever that's worth.
So you started playing the drums. What was kind of the transition to playing like guitar and stuff?
I mean, the first band that I ever played in was drums, and uh this was in 1988, I want to say. Um, and it was me, um, Rob Vitale, who went on to sing for Black Train Jack, um, Scott Martin, who went on to play in Mind Over Matter, and this guy Kenny, who knows what happened to Kenny. And I played drums, and I remember we were bad. We were bad, and I think like playing in that band was good for me because it made me realize that I wasn't great at drums. Like I wanted to be, but I didn't really have a lot of space to practice. When you're a drummer in New York, it's like, where do you play? How you can't play that long, and it's just I knew that if I wanted to get better, it was just going to be like an uphill battle. And so my brother was a guitar player, and he always had guitars around the house. And there was something about the idea that I could not only be in a band, but that I could help make the music, like come in with ideas and melodic sort of like or riff based contributions that that just turned me on. And I think I remember Positive Outlook was the name of that band, and we were about to play our first show, and a month before the first show, I quit because I was like, I'm gonna embarrass myself. I am not good. Like this sucks. I'm not good. Get another drummer. Don't embarrass yourselves. Like you'll be fine. And and so when I quit that band, that's when I started playing guitar. And that took a long time too to get that learning curve to kind of get to a place where I felt confident enough um to start a band. And that didn't happen until 1990 into 1991, which is when I started Fountainhead. And and by that point, interestingly, Fountainhead was already sort of a post-hardcore band. So I'd sort of like in learning how to play guitar, I'd already sort of like missed the boat on hardcore.
What was the factor that what made you want to start Texas then? Like already having like other bands and being a part of other bands, was it just like creative identity thing, or was it just like wanting to do it with a different friend, or all the above?
Yeah, well, Fountainhead was like a very beautiful thing, right? Like when you're in your first band, and I should say like I'm not embarrassed of the things that I wrote for Fountainhead. Like the record that's on streaming now, about half of it, I would say, is stuff that I wrote, and that I feel I didn't play on that record because I'd already quit at that point to join Resurrection. But I was shockingly like, oh wow, like I actually wrote things that I'm not embarrassed of. This is cool, right? Um, it was only a lot of sort of random series of events that led me into the way that where I joined Resurrection, then I joined 108, then I joined Shelter, and it was like all very fast and very random, and it was very like what band is Norman this week kind of thing.
Hmm.
And but the thing about all of those bands was they weren't my bands. I didn't start them. I didn't write the music for them. Uh, I loved touring. I learned a shit ton. And I think that was the thing too. So Shelter obviously was the band that I was in the longest. And like they were in 1992 to 1994 probably the biggest hardcore band. Like the biggest like proper hardcore band. So we were at a scale where I learned a lot about how to be in a band, how to do the business of a band, how to sort of like get your music out there. It was all practical stuff that you don't learn like unless you experience it. And so halfway through that, Shelter in 108 did a tour, and Chris Daly, who's the drummer of Texas, was in 108. So we were on tour that summer for 4 months. It was the longest fucking tour. And and every day we would get together. And Chris was also in Resurrection. So we have this history. And every day we would just get together and we would just be like, yeah, like okay, we definitely are going to start a band and it's definitely going to be different. It's going to sound more like the things we like and the things we sound like or the things we listen to. And because that was the thing, like 108 and Shelter were great bands, but I don't think Chris or I really listened to a ton of music that sounded like the bands we were in. And we wanted to sort of do something that was like a little bit more expansive, I guess. And so it was an idea, and that was the summer of 1993. So it didn't actually turn into something until I think the idea really started congealing in late 94. And that was when I'd say like the first few songs started to sort of come about and I just needed a singer. And we found Garrett at around that time, like almost like 94 to 95. Um, and that was as soon as like he came down from Buffalo and we got in a room and he started like doing the sort of fake singing when you don't know what you're singing yet
Hmm.
part. But as soon as he started fake singing over the songs, it was like that's it. This is the band. This is it. This is the band.
So at that point then, did you find it? Well, actually, I'm gonna back up. What was the name behind Texas is the reason? Like, I was there any correlation with the actual state itself, or was it just a name that randomly popped into your head?
No, it was a Misfits lyric.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah. It was, I mean, there's dispute now over like the story. Uh, and the other guys I think have a version that I don't even remember because my version is so clear in my brain.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, at the very least, the part that I feel is incontrovertible is that Chris Leo was at Scott, our bass player's apartment. And so Scott lived with Glenn Mariansky, who was the guy who designed all our records. And Chris Leo was the singer for the Van Pelt. And my memory is that they asked Chris Leo, what band names were you tossing around before you came up with the Van Pelt? And my memory is that Texas is the Reason was one of those names. And they were like, that's it. Garrett, I think, was at the house too. So Garrett and Scott call me up and they're like, we got it. We got it. I'm like, what is it? And they're like, Texas is the Reason. And I was like, what the hell is that? Like I didn't put two and two together. And then when they said bullet, and I was like, oh, I was like, I don't want to be named after a Misfits lyric. That's weird.
Yeah.
But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, actually, like that's actually better because it's not like we sound like the Misfits. It's not like it's like an homage, like that we're, like trying to be the Misfits or we're going to be shock core or like whatever. Like there was such a dissonance between where the name came from and what we were doing that it was almost like perfect. And so I think I finally just sort of like it took me a minute, but I was like, yeah, you're right. That's the name. That's definitely it.
Will that be like a song too, then, when you listen to it, that like you always think about Texas is the reason? Like, or
When I
is it,
listen to Bullet.
yeah, or is it like you try and like it's just like it's still like your rotation to this day, or
I mean, what's funny about it is that like after we named the band Texas is the Reason, I feel like we've changed the history of that song forever because that lyric wasn't something that was the first thing that people thought of when it came to anything. So, and I actually, so before I fully agreed to the name, uh, I had a test because I didn't want it to be a situation where I told people, they said, "What's the name of your band?" I said, "Texas is the Reason." Everybody's like, "Oh, Misfits." I didn't want that to be the case. So I I asked three people, um, and I want to say they were, I mean, I remember it was like Jordan from Revelation, Mark Ryan from Super Touch, and I want to say maybe Keith from Cause for Alarm. Jordan, because I knew he was interested in the band, and Mark and Keith, because Mark and Keith are both from New Jersey, and they're both were in the hardcore scene in the early 80s when the Misfits were playing. If anybody would be like, ugh, Misfits, it would be them.
Mhm.
And I swear to God, none of them even made the connection. They were all like, that's a weird name, but none of them made the connection until I said Bullet. And they were like, oh, fuck. So, so there, like I said, there was just enough, like nobody thought about that lyric. It was so non sequitur that now it's the first thing people think about when they think of Bullet. Now there's like a book about Texas punk called Texas is the Reason. That book would not have been called Texas is the Reason if it weren't for us.
Yeah.
We drew that line out, and it's sort of like that Jay-Z lyric, like you gave me a hot line, I made it a hot song. Like is that's sort of the vibe.
How did you how did you get approached then to do like having the special edition come out last year with like the Texas Cities and like full discography? Was that something that was kind of in the books for you for a while, or was that did you get approached to re-put that out?
Yeah, I mean, the band itself we knew that the 30th anniversary was sort of coming, and that was sort of interesting, but I didn't know what that necessarily would mean. Jordan, um, so our records have been basically among the top two. We're like within the top two bands of Revelation history, right? Um, so it's like I knew that there was like a thing where they would want to do something. What it is that in 2012 we put out an anthology, which had everything in one package, and that was very much what people were doing in 2012. But since then, as streaming took over, everyone's been de-anthologizing
Hmm.
everything because streaming is such that like you want to have the actual releases, right? Like you can sort of like understand a band's trajectory more clearly. So Jordan knew that he wanted to de-anthologize the anthology. And he basically came to us and sort of asked us, what would that look like to you if you could do that? And my suggestion was, can we do a three-part series that covers the three very specific moments of the band's history? So the first four songs, which were the 7-inch and the Samuel split, were all written and recorded around the same time with the same person. So I was like, let's bring Something to Forget version one back into that fold because that to me is very cohesive about the band's first several months. Then that middle year was all Do You Know Who You Are? And that was, very clear. And I was like, we're adding photos and we're adding sort of like ephemera and just like all sort of things to make it feel more historic and special. And then the third element is will be a thing that's just never been released because it is essentially reconnecting the last three songs, which were Blue Boy, Every Little Girl's Dream, and When Rock and Roll Was Just a Baby. And those three songs were the beginning of the second record. Those were the first three songs that we were like, this is the direction we're going in. And uh, I guess it's still sort of like to be determined. We haven't finished the art for the third one yet. Um, it's going to be determined, I guess, like what it's going to be called and sort of like how we're going to present it. But I'm very happy that those three songs can live in the sort of existence that they were sort of meant to live in the first place. Because I think people think of Blue Boy as the song in the Promise Ring split. But, our plan was always to re-record it and to put it on the album. It's one of our favorite songs.
Hmm.
So, but those three songs very much are like the spirit of what the next record could have been. And I'm just happy to sort of put that into its own package as well with new art and sort of, we're sort of deciding how we're going to present that because that's something that's never been presented as its own thing before.
Gotcha. Was that like was it a pretty easy decision then when you guys got approached to do the reissue or the new three part?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think we're all sort of like obviously I don't even know what the word is, like because there's no real word to describe when you're like, fuck, like how did we do something that we're even talking about 30 years of that people still care about, that people still want? Like, this is like it's inconceivable. Like honestly, 30 years is a long time. Like I barely believe that I'm old enough to have something like this.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also like amazing and beautiful, and it's sort of like one of the things like that I've always been very precious about the band in terms of like the things that I will or will not do because I just want everything. I feel like we had this like, you know, rocky but tidy existence where the creative things that we did together for me were perfect.
Hmm.
I wouldn't change a thing. Creatively, everything is there and it's just right. And so anything that comes about because of that perfect little creative bubble, I need to feel fully like invested in and like feeling like I'm keeping that bubble safe. It's precious to me.
When, like, kind of fast forward to now, you currently are in Thursday. How did you get approached to be in Thursday?
Um, I have known those guys since I met them in I want to say 2003. Um, I actually met them the night before I got hit by a tow truck. Uh, I was living in San Francisco and they were playing, it was Thursday Thrice and Coheed in San Francisco. Um, at the time, Coheed was on Equal Vision, and Steve Reddy, who runs Equal Vision, is one of my best friends. So I went to go visit Steve. And while I was there, I I was just hanging out in the dressing rooms and stuff. And Steve Padula uh, walks up to me and he's like, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "No." And it turns out that Steve and I were tape trading friends in the 90s. So we used to trade demo tapes, videotapes, like back and forth to each other. Um, I don't know where we found each other, probably through antimatter, but like as soon as he said that, I was like, "Oh my God, what are you doing here?" And
Yeah.
he's like, "I'm in Thursday." I was like, I had no idea. Um, and so after that night, we really, we stayed in contact. I actually was a writer for a documentary movie about Thursday called Kill the House Lights, which came out in 2007. And then in 2012, 2013, something like that. Maybe it was 10 years ago, so maybe 2014 or 15. I was I ran a record label with Jeff called Collect, and so we worked together for 2 to 3 years. So we've always been like friends and in each other's orbits, and like really way before playing in the band, I was kind of like a weird confidant of the band, I think, in a lot of ways. Because I did that movie, especially, like I really got to know everybody very well. And so it started with, as most things do, with COVID, where they were doing these COVID sort of like streaming things, and they wanted different guests to come in and play different songs. And so they asked me to play a couple of songs with them um, for this COVID live stream. So I did that. And then when COVID finally cleared and touring was starting to happen, I get a call from their manager, Paul, and it was very cryptic. He just said, "If you had to learn 16 Thursday songs in 2 weeks, could you do it?" And I was like, maybe, I get, I don't know. What are you talking about? He's like, "I'll call you back." So what the deal is that I ended up in the band because they were about to go on tour, and Frank from My Chemical Romance was going to be their extra guitar player. Uh, and 2 weeks before the tour, Frank was working on his house and he fell off a ladder and broke both his wrists. And when Paul called me, Frank was in the hospital, but he was still waiting to get the word on how long it was going to take to heal. And when he realized, like, there's no way I can do this tour, Paul calls me back in a panic, like, "Can you do this tour?"
Yeah.
And it was 2 weeks, and I said, "Sure." And I learned the songs, and I went out. And literally no one has ever asked me to not be in the band since then. So I just kind of have kept going now, and it's been like 4 something years. Um, yeah, no, I mean, nobody asked me to be in the band or to stop being in the band. It just sort of stayed.
I gotcha. Just like a thing.
But I mean, I love that because it was like, it was so natural from the beginning. We were already, I mean, I very much consider those guys to be family. Like and I know people say that about bands all the time, but as someone who's been in a lot of bands, I've never been in a band like Thursday. I really feel so safe and just cared for. Like I feel like a human being in this band. It's really like nothing I've ever experienced. I wouldn't be doing music like this if it weren't exactly like this.
Did you find it difficult to hop in a band that was like very well established and very pivotal in their portion of the scene and like to now with like songwriting and stuff? Like, did you kind of feel like it was a little tough to, because obviously with Texas and stuff, like you were writing a lot of the songs. Did you find it difficult to kind of get your footing in there, or were they pretty willing to let you in quick?
I think like, well, okay, so when I first started playing with them and specifically touring, I think there were two things I was super concerned with. So one was like the fans, right? Like, are the fans going to accept me, right? And then the second thing was Tom, who I have like the utmost love and respect for, and wanting to honor his contribution to Thursday. Um, because he was a major contribution creatively, musically, aesthetically, like, he's a goat, right? And I
Hmm.
so I really want to like respect and honor him through that as well. So it was really important to me to learn the songs as faithfully to what Tom does, and then figuring out the moments where I'm bringing my own voice into the mix, right, musically. And I think like it's interesting. Like at one point, I remember Tucker saying, I actually play the songs a little bit different because you play them with a different groove. And I've kind of like leaned into that. And I was like, that's cool.
Yeah.
Right. So there's something about that that was like very great. And I think the fans realize that too. I think when you come in and you're sort of like, if you come in and you sort of like think you own the place, people are going to be like, fuck you.
Yeah.
But I think the fans saw that I was coming in, one, with a lot of love and respect for the guys, two, with a lot of love and respect from the guys. Um, and and they accepted me like really quickly, I felt like, and wholeheartedly. As far as the writing stuff goes, I think that that was a super unique situation because the band had not written for so long, or at least had not finished and released songs in so long, that there was this invisible ceiling that we had to break. And I think that in a lot of ways, me and Stu, who's producing everything and like also in the band, because we're sort of like the fresh blood and we don't have the baggage of 20 plus years of being in Thursday, we could be the guys to tell the other guys like, no, 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 we can do this.
Hmm.
Look, we can make this happen. Check out these ideas. This is sick, you know. And I think we were able to sort of like pump them up so that we were all in this like group sort of place of like being psyched to make new things. And really, I knew that ultimately it was going to be about we just have to do it once. As soon as we release that one song, the ceiling will be broken and we can do whatever the fuck we want, but we just have to get over it,
Hmm.
right? And I think it took a while, but when application for Release from the Dream sort of really came together, and the thing about that song that I think is unique in the Thursday catalog is that it sounds somehow every part of that song sounds like a different era of Thursday. It's like it's almost like a Thursday, this is your life. And it's such a unique song in that way. But I remember like finishing it and listening to it and being like, how does it do this? Like I'm hearing this from Full Collapse, I'm hearing this from War All the Time, I'm hearing this from, Common Existence and Node Evolution and like all these things where I was just like, this is so sick. And I think like everyone sort of heard it and was like, yeah, this is the one, let's put it out. And then obviously getting that huge response and people like really loving it. After that, um, it was just about being creative at that point, and it wasn't about sort of like what your history was, what songs you wrote or didn't write, how long you've been in the band or not. It was just like, let's make the best possible things.
I'll leave you with one final question. What was, or sorry, what is like Norman's goals this year? Being a part of so many different projects and being in like a new year, what is something that you really want to do in the music scene or with Antimatter, which is still in the music scene, but you know what I mean? That you would want to put out in
I mean,
2026 or
God,
continue on?
I have like so many things that I want to do, which is a problem. It paralyzes me all the time. Um, I have like mini goals. I don't believe in like these like grand resolutions.
Mm,
Like, I want to make $1 million or whatever it is. Like, I believe that like to try to create mini goals, right? So like for example, one of the mini goals that I have is like I want to write song starters for at least 5 new Thursday songs, right? And the way Thursday writes is very different than any other band I've ever been in, which is to say that like whatever I bring to them, I know is going to come out completely different. And it's glorious and I love that and I want that. But someone's got to bring ideas. So we all are bringing ideas and all that stuff, but I've been a little bit busy and wrapped up in other things over the last several months. So I feel like I want to focus a little bit on writing and on bringing at least 5 new ideas to the table. So that's sort of like a very doable resolution. I think with antimatter, I still need to put out this book that I've been talking about. I still want to reissue the compilation album. Um, I think these things are doable, but I do feel like I need a little bit of help because I am but one man.
mhm.
And all of this stuff is a lot of work. But if I'm being honest with you, I think a lot of the sort of like when I'm thinking about 2026 and sort of like the things that I want to accomplish, they're more personal. Like the creative stuff comes out of um, personal well-being for me. So if I'm not doing well, you'll know it because I'm not doing anything. And so the only way these other things get done is if I'm feeling well and whole inside. And and so a lot of the things are more just like being conscious of my body and sort of like taking care of my body in sort of like real consistent ways, being conscious of my mental health. And, you know, I've been taking a break from therapy, but I'm like I probably need to get back in and sort of like freshen up. Just sort of like focusing on my relationship a little bit more. Like maybe I've been on autopilot for a little while. We just had our 20th anniversary. That's wild. Um, but it's really easy to just like go into autopilot after 20 years, right? How can I make this feel alive and special and cool? Like what can I do? I think that that's the whole point of life is like, are you letting life happen to you or are you taking the steering wheel? And I think last year I was sort of letting life happen to me for a little while because the year before was kind of an intense year for me, like work wise and like activity wise and all these things that I just sort of like was like, fuck this. I'm stepping back, but I'm ready to grab the steering wheel again. And and so like I said, I think taking care of myself first and foremost, that is the thing that's going to make the creative things happen.
Absolutely. Well, that was a great answer. I'm looking forward to seeing everything that you put out this year. And guys, down below there will be a link. The best way to keep up with Norman is through his Instagram, I would say. He has an
Definitely.
awesome reel series talking about like Texas is the reason 30 years in 3 minutes, which was really awesome. I think it was a 5-part series. So definitely check it out. Yeah, stay connected and till next time. See you guys.